Cops of Reddit, what has so far been the creepiest call you've ever had to respond to, and what happened? From my post 8 months ago, got a call for a missing child, got to the home to find the mother highly distressed and not sure what to do. I called in everyone to first search the home and property. I decided to search the backyard since it was a large wooded lot with no visible fence. After about 10 minutes, I found the boy. He was caught on an old chain link fence in the woods that was blocked by a bunch of trees, so you couldn't see it from the house. He had basically gotten strangled to death on the fence. He must have been climbing on it, fell, and got his hooded sweatshirt caught on it. The worst part for me was having to call it in on the radio, knowing the mother might hear it inside from one of the other officers' radio. Working third shift on Halloween night, I'm out by one of our smaller lakes just outside the city limits. Kids love to go out and drink, which is surrounded by some very nice houses. Going through the neighborhood, each of the roads ends at a small 2-lane road that surrounds the lake. I'm slowing to the stop sign and already starting to look to my right to make the turn when my headlights start tracing the rock wall that surrounds the lake. I catch something out of the corner of my eye in one of the large trees that dots the walk path. I back up to see what it was and I see a guy hanging. At first I thought it was a Halloween decoration. The neighborhood is really into decorating for every holiday. So I stop, get out, and as soon as my flashlight hits him, I realize, nope, no decoration, he dead. As I'm standing there getting ready to call it in, I notice a gaggle of kids coming down the street, trick or treating. Shit. As soon as they see my car, they start heading my way faster, so I book it back up the block to meet the parent walking with them and tell her she needs to take the long way around the block the other way. She can see it on my face, I'm not kidding. Turns out he was a 20-year-old that was devastated about his girlfriend breaking up with him, and she lived in the last house on that block where she would see him the next morning when she looked out her window. I responded to a report of an unresponsive infant. When I arrived, all the family members were standing around casually in the front yard pointing into the house. I found the baby in the back room, laying on her back on a bare mattress. I started CPR but realized the baby was probably already deceased. We rushed her out to the arriving ambulance hoping they had a way to bring her back. I learned she was the mother's second suspicious SIDS death and I had her other children removed from her care. The difficult part was when I left the scene and went to the ER to see what came of the situation. As I walked in and asked where she was, an ER nurse walked over to me and handed me the deceased baby swaddled in a blanket and told me to wait for someone to show me to the morgue. So I'm standing there in the ER in uniform, holding what everyone thinks is a live infant, but rather an infant corpse. And several people stop by wanting to see her and commenting on how cute it is to see an officer holding a baby. I just smiled, but it killed me inside. I was ushered back to the morgue after what felt like an eternity and told I had to wait with the baby until the medical examiner arrived. They took the blankets off and laid her on a stainless steel gurney and left me alone with her again. I lounged around the morgue for about an hour waiting. By the time I got home several hours after the end of my shift, because this call came out 15 minutes before the end of my 10-hour shift, I laid down on my bed and cried for a long time. My young daughter was in daycare and my wife at work. I really needed to hold both of them, so the house felt incredibly empty. My daughter was only slightly older than the infant, and when I was looking at her earlier, I kept seeing my own daughter. I didn't get any sleep at all before going back in for the next shift later that night. Not a cop myself, but my dad is, and I asked him this one time. He told me it was when he went to this one house because a woman had called and said that men were breaking into the house. He gets there and he said, it was immediately very clear that the woman was not exactly all together mentally. He said she kept mumbling things and was very jumpy and skittish. Not to mention that every single wall of her house apparently had at least 6 or 7 crosses on it, if not more. He calms her down, checks around the house for any signs of entry or just anything weird, and there's absolutely nothing that would indicate that anyone had been trying to or had been successful in breaking in. He said she followed him around the entire time and would point to things, like a doorknob or window latches, and say, "Oh, that's not where I left it. That's how they got in." He said the whole thing was fairly eerie considering he was at this woman's house in the middle of the night, surrounded by crosses and listening to her mumble on about random shit. To make her feel better, he did a sweep of the whole house to see if there was anyone else inside, which there wasn't. He said the one thing that made it creepy for him was the fact that every few minutes she'd say something like, "Oh, they're here again," or "He's right behind us, I can feel it." UK got called to assist ambulance at an address because they were struggling with a woman who'd had an apparent seizure. We got there, and she's this tiny, skinny little Singaporean lady who's being held down on the floor by a paramedic. She's hissing and struggling against her and repeatedly trying to bite the paramedic. Her eyes are all black and red, no white. It takes me 200 pounds. My partner for the evening, approximately 180 pounds, plus 3 paramedics to hold her down. All the time she's struggling and trying to bite with veins popping out of her neck. She's looking past us at the corner of the room, screaming at something that isn't there, telling it not to kill her and us. Her husband, who seems weirdly unfazed by the whole thing, tells us this has been happening since she last went to Singapore and got sick after visiting a holy site. Usually her sister has to stop it by putting this powder on her forehead in a cross, but unfortunately she's out of the country. In the end, she was taken to hospital for a mental health assessment by the paramedics. I often wonder what the outcome was, but have no way of finding out, unfortunately. For some reason, the suicides always hit me the hardest. I had a good friend that killed himself in high school, so suicide is a touchy thing, not just for everyone, but especially for those who have personal experience with it. I've seen 3 suicides by gun, 2 hangings, and a handful that did it intentionally by using drugs of some sort or other methods. Long story short, guy shot himself in his garage with a .357 Magnum. I have a pretty strong stomach, thankfully because of experience, but I believe I accidentally stepped on a piece of his eye. When I cleared the call, I went straight to the locker room and cleaned the bottom of my boots for a good 40 minutes. I repeated the cleaning process at home too. Now sure, that's not exactly creepy, just disturbing. But here's this one. We get a call from the hotel off the interstate. Employees went to clean a room and found a note on the bathroom door, which was closed and locked. It read, "Don't come in, call 911. So the front desk did just that. We get there and she shows us the room. We try knocking on the bathroom door. No answer. We weren't even sure if there was someone in there or not. The on-site manager told us we were allowed to force entry into the bathroom. She was concerned because none of the employees ever remember the guest checking out. My partner gets the door open, and it was like something off of a horror movie. Guy was in the tub, completely naked, knife on the floor, just next to the tub, cuts on his wrists, and the absolute worst thing was the blood inside of the tub. I've never seen so much blood in my 10+ year career. His face was pale white, and it appeared as he was frowning. He didn't appear to be breathing. Call a medic, Zrinya, my partner says. I just look at him and say, no, dude's dead. I'm not touching him. You can check if you want, but we need to get our supervisor and EVT and detective here. I could recognize a dead guy when I saw one. I get the manager, who was having a legit panic attack, to calm down and head back down to the desk while we deal with this. Called for another car and told dispatch to contact our evidence technicians and a detective when I hear my partner scream and exclaim, "Oh, f***y shit." I run back over there and he's wide-eyed staring at the body. He just moved. That fuck alive, man. He moved. What are you talking about? He has a fucking pulse. It's faint as hell, but he has it. His leg moved under the water when I tried checking for it. Sure enough, I put on my big boy undies and could barely feel a pulse on this guy. Medic called and they rushed him to the ER. Turned out he did the cutting just minutes before the cleaning maid found the note. So surprisingly, he barely lived. Editing for clarity, I need to remember not to post long comments while on mobile. He lived, but it wasn't pretty. He cut his wrists while he was bathing. A majority of what looked like blood was indeed blood, but it was mixed in with water, which made it look like there was a lot more blood than what he actually spilled. And in all honesty, cutting your wrists isn't a great way to off yourself. He thinks he was bleeding for about 10 or 15 minutes before he started to go to sleep, and he would have been fine for a little longer as long as he got help. It depends on a lot of other circumstances. And I know I should have been more proactive in checking for signs of life. It was irresponsible for me to not check sooner. In many instances, it's fairly easy to spot a corpse when you have one, but this one really tricked us, and we learned from that. Thankfully, my partner did while I stepped out, and I was not intending to stop him from doing so. My tone was a bit more cynical. Hey, dude looks dead. I really don't think we need a medic. You can check him, but I don't want to. And in our defense, he really did appear to be 100% dead. No chest movement at all, pale skin. It looked like he could have been there for at least hours. But like I said, I was wrong, and I acknowledge that. Sometimes you forget that your experience and training isn't objective, and still being relatively new, then it was a learning experience for me. You can bet that from there on, we both were more cautious. Got a report of a missing husband. He told his wife and family of 6 children that he was going to get his tires changed, but never returned, and this was 12 hours ago. They had purchased another house in a neighboring community, and the relationship with the wife was under pressure, so the wife assumed he was staying at the other house and claimed he would never kill himself. The strange thing about this report, though, was that he emptied his personal bank account into his wife's this morning as well. The wife explained this off, saying that they recently had a fight about finances, and he agreed that he was bad at money and maybe they should just have a joint account that she controls. On a hunch, I asked his 14-year-old boy if there were any areas in the mountains nearby that his father enjoyed going, and the son identified a road about 10 miles away. It was nearing midnight, but I decided to drive to the top of this old and abandoned Forest Service road. As I drove through the snow and started to climb the road, I felt a gut feeling that I would 100% find this guy up there, either thinking about or already acted out a suicide. The snow-laid gravel road had some sign of travel, but no real indication of how fresh the vehicle tracks could be. As I reached the top of the road, after an hour of travel, I was honestly surprised that I didn't find his black truck. I spent the drive back down thinking about gut feelings and how they are unreliable, that I somehow felt different about this one. As I traveled up the road, I did notice over a dozen smaller roads branching off, but they were not mapped, and I'd already spent too much time on a single occurrence in a busy city with too few police officers. Nonetheless, I decided to check a single of these secondary roads, and about 3/4 of the way down, I picked a road at random to check, and sure enough, my headlights lit up the back end of a black truck about 100 yards past the first corner. Even if I hadn't memorized the license plate beforehand, I wouldn't have had to run it. It was clearly his. I radioed that I had found the truck, parked my vehicle, and traveled the 20 feet to his truck with my heart beating, like I was doing it at a sprint rather than a normal walk. What I found inside was a mess of brains and blood caused by a self-inflicted shotgun wound under the chin. I'll save you from the description. There was just something about that gut feeling while traveling this abandoned and quiet mountain road, followed by a sense of being tricked by the gut feeling, then finding out it was true by discovering such a gruesome scene, having to wait 3 hours next to his truck waiting for body removal, and then to end it all by having to go to the family who was expecting good news to deliver to them the worst news possible. That makes me feel creeped out to this day. Thank you for watching. Write comments, put likes. Do not forget to watch other videos.